For decades, the name Errol Flynn has stood as one of Hollywood's most complicated legends, a symbol of adventure, charm, and undeniable talent, but also of scandal, excess, and tragedy. To the public, he was the ultimate swashbuckling hero, a man who seemed born to play daring swordsmen and fearless rebels. On screen, he smiled easily, moved with confidence, and made danger look thrilling. Yet behind that bright image lived a far more troubled man, one shaped by a painful childhood, personal demons, and a Hollywood system that cared more about myth than truth. Few people understood this reality better than Patrice Wymore, Flynn's third wife and the woman who remained closest to him during his final, darkest years. At the age of 85, after decades of silence and quiet living in Jamaica, Patrice finally confirmed what many fans had long refused to accept. Much of Errol Flynn's infamous reputation was carefully manufactured, exaggerated, and sometimes cruelly distorted by the studios that once made him a star. Errol Leslie Flynn was born on June 20th, 1909, in Battery Point, Tasmania, into a home that looked respectable from the outside, but felt cold and unstable within. His father, Theodore Thompson Flynn, was a respected professor of biology, deeply focused on his work and research. His mother, Lily Mary Young, however, was emotionally distant and often harsh toward her son. From a young age, Errol felt unwanted and misunderstood. His childhood was marked by loneliness and emotional neglect, experiences that left deep scars and shaped the rebellious behavior that would later define his youth. Lily frequently insulted him, once calling him a devil in a boy's clothing, words that Errol never forgot. Surrounded by exotic animals his father kept for scientific study, young Errol learned early how to survive in a world where affection was scarce and approval was rare. As he grew older, Errol's defiance of authority became impossible to ignore. Between 1915 and 1926, he was expelled from nearly every school he attended, first in Tasmania and later in Sydney. He was known for fighting, stealing, and pushing boundaries far beyond what society considered acceptable. Even as a teenager, rumors followed him, including stories of inappropriate relationships and behavior that shocked those around him. By the age of 17, he was already seen as a lost cause, a brilliant but uncontrollable young man with no clear future. Yet beneath the chaos was a restless spirit driven by a deep desire to escape his painful beginnings. In 1927, at just 18 years old, Flynn left Australia in search of adventure, first traveling to Papua New Guinea. There, he claimed to have survived dangerous encounters, including a tribal attack, and even told stories of standing trial for murder. While some of these tales were later questioned or exaggerated, they reveal Flynn's growing need to reinvent himself. He tried gold mining, journalism, and a variety of risky pursuits, all of which helped form the daring image that would later captivate movie audiences. These early experiences gave him confidence, a love for danger, and a flair for storytelling, qualities that would soon catch the attention of filmmakers by the early 1930s. Fate finally pushed Errol Flynn toward acting. His first significant role came in the 1933 Australian film In the Wake of the Bounty, where he played Fletcher Christian, although the film itself failed to make a major impact. Flynn's presence stood out. This small opportunity opened the door to Hollywood, where Warner Brothers signed him in 1935. At first, he was treated as just another foreign actor with little promise. Everything changed when British star Robert Donat fell ill, and Flynn was unexpectedly cast in the lead role of Captain Blood. The film was a massive success, transforming Flynn overnight into a global star. At just 26 years old, he became the face of Hollywood adventure, beginning a legend that would follow him for the rest of his life. With the success of Captain Blood in 1935, Errol Flynn's life changed faster than he could fully understand or control. Almost overnight, he went from being an unknown foreign actor to one of Hollywood's most valuable stars. Warner Brothers immediately recognized his potential and shaped him into the perfect screen hero. Flynn had the looks, the athletic ability, and the natural charm audiences loved. He did not need heavy acting training to convince people he was brave or confident. He simply appeared that way. The studio placed him in a series of adventure films that would define his career and permanently fix his image in the public mind. Movies like The Charge of the Light Brigade, The Prince and the Pauper, and especially The Adventures of Robin Hood turned Flynn into a symbol of courage rebellion, and romance point one of the most important parts of Flynn's rise was his pairing with actress Olivia de Havilland. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, and audiences believed in their love stories, even when they knew nothing about their private lives. De Havilland was only 19 when she first appeared alongside Flynn, but together they created one of the most beloved screen partnerships in cinema history. Warner Brothers carefully promoted them as the ideal couple, knowing that romance sold tickets. Behind the scenes, however, Flynn was already beginning to struggle. The pressure to maintain his image, combined with unresolved pain from his childhood, pushed him toward unhealthy habits. Drinking became a regular escape, and his reckless behavior was often ignored or quietly managed by the studio because he was making them enormous profits. During this time, Hollywood studios operated like powerful machines that controlled nearly every aspect of an actor's life. Warner Brothers did not just sell films. They sold personalities. Flynn was encouraged to live like the characters he played, or at least appear that way in public. His wild reputation, rather than being discouraged, was often fed to gossip columns because it kept his name in headlines. Stories of heavy drinking, womanizing, and dangerous behavior made him seem exciting and untouchable. The studio understood that audiences loved a hero who lived boldly, even recklessly. What they did not consider was the long-term damage such a manufactured image could cause as the late 1930s turned into the early 1940s. Flynn's personal life grew increasingly unstable. While he remained one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, his emotional health deteriorated. He felt lonely, insecure, and trapped by expectations he could no longer meet. Fame had not healed his inner wounds. It had only hidden them behind wealth and applause. He began relying more heavily on alcohol and casual relationships to numb his discomfort. The carefree image sold to the public masked a man who was quietly falling apart. Everything came crashing down in 1942 when Flynn became the center of one of Hollywood's most shocking legal scandals. Two teenage girls accused him of statutory rape, charges that immediately turned his glamorous life into a public nightmare. The accusations dominated newspaper headlines and divided public opinion. For some fans, Flynn was still the charming hero they admired. For others, he became a symbol of Hollywood's moral corruption. Warner Brothers reacted quickly, hiring a powerful defense attorney and doing everything possible to protect their investment. The trial itself became a spectacle, filled with dramatic performances, aggressive questioning, and moments that shocked even seasoned observers at court. Flynn appeared calm and controlled, denying all accusations while maintaining the confident image audiences expected. Outside the courtroom, however, chaos ruled. Crowds gathered, women fainted, and the case became a form of twisted entertainment. After long deliberation, the jury found Flynn not guilty on all counts. Legally, he was cleared. Publicly, however, his reputation was forever damaged. The phrase, unlike Flynn, once a playful expression of success, took on a darker meaning. Although his career continued, something had shifted. The studio could no longer fully control how the public saw him, and Flynn himself was deeply affected by the experience. The trial marked a turning point. While he continued to make films, the joy and confidence that once defined him were fading. The weight of scandal, combined with years of excess and emotional pain, pushed him further towards self-destruction. Hollywood still needed Errol Flynn the legend, but the man behind the myth was growing weaker, more isolated, and increasingly lost by the late 1940s. The golden glow that once surrounded Errol Flynn had begun to dim, even though his name still carried great power in Hollywood. He was no longer the young, energetic hero who had leaped across castle walls and swung effortlessly from ropes on screen. Years of heavy drinking, emotional stress, and physical strain had started to show in his appearance and behavior. His face grew fuller, his movements slower, and his once effortless charm required more effort to maintain. Audiences noticed the change, even if studios tried to hide it with careful lighting and makeup. Flynn himself was painfully aware that time and excess were catching up with him. It was during this period of decline that fate introduced Flynn to Patrice Wymore, a young and talented actress whose life was moving in the opposite direction. Patrice was born on December 17th, 1926, in Kansas, and had already begun to make a name for herself on stage and screen. She had won the Theatre World Award in 1947 for her Broadway performance in Hold It and soon signed a contract with Warner Brothers. Unlike Flynn, Patrice was disciplined, focused, and hopeful about the future. When the two met in 1950 while filming Rocky Mountain in New Mexico, their connection was immediate. Despite their large age difference, there was a genuine bond that surprised many people in Hollywood. At the time, Flynn was already engaged to Princess Irene Geek of Greece, and few believed that his relationship with Patrice would lead anywhere serious. His past behavior had earned him a reputation for short-lived romances and broken commitments. Yet something about Patrice seemed different. She did not chase his fame or feed his ego. Instead, she offered warmth, understanding, and a sense of stability that Flynn had rarely experienced. Against expectations, Warner Brothers announced their engagement in August 1950, stunning both the press and the public. Their marriage followed just months later on October 23, 1950, in Monaco, with ceremonies held in both a town hall and a church in Nice, France. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Flynn had found a fresh start. Fans gathered behind barricades to catch a glimpse of the newlyweds, eager to believe in another Hollywood fairy tale. Wanting to escape constant attention, the couple retreated from Hollywood life and settled in Jamaica, where Flynn owned a vast estate. The property included coconut groves, cattle pastures, and the famous yacht, the Zaka. Their home became a gathering place for artists, writers, and actors, including Ava Gardner, Noel Coward, and Truman Capote. Nights were filled with music, laughter, and beachside gatherings that felt far removed from the pressures of Hollywood in 1953. Patrice gave birth to their daughter, Arnella Roma Flynn, on Christmas Day in Rome. Motherhood changed Patrice's life completely. She stepped back from her promising career to focus on raising her child and managing their household. While she continued to appear in a few films, her priorities shifted. Flynn, meanwhile, continued to struggle. Despite moments of happiness, his addictions and health problems worsened. Patrice did her best to support him, but caring for a man battling both physical illness and emotional demons proved exhausting. Behind the beauty of their Jamaican life, reality was far harsher. Flynn's health had been failing for years. He had suffered his first heart attack in his early 30s and was plagued by malaria, liver damage, and constant pain. To cope, he relied heavily on alcohol and later on morphine. His dependence grew stronger as his career weakened. By the mid-1950s, Warner Brothers ended their long relationship with him, no longer willing to insure an actor whose health and reliability had become serious concerns. Financial troubles followed quickly, fueled by poor investments, unpaid debts, and costly personal projects. For Patrice, these years were a test of strength and loyalty. She balanced motherhood, financial stress, and emotional weight of watching the man she loved slowly destroy himself. Flynn himself admitted in his memoirs that Patrice was kind, loving, and devoted, but he could not overcome his inner struggles. The fairy tale marriage faded into a quiet, painful reality, one that Patrice would carry with her long after Flynn's final curtain call. As the 1950s moved forward, Errol Flynn's decline became impossible to hide, even from those closest to him. The adventurous spirit that once seemed endless was now trapped inside a body worn down by years of abuse. Alcohol had become a daily necessity rather than a social habit, and morphine was no longer just a medical aid, but a powerful addiction. Friends and colleagues watched as Flynn struggled to arrive on set, forgot lines, and appeared visibly exhausted. Directors who once fought to work with him now saw him as a risk. The man who had once defined Hollywood heroism was slowly being pushed to the margins of the industry he helped shape. Physically, Flynn was in serious trouble. His liver was heavily damaged from drinking, sometimes consuming 2 to 3 quarts of vodka a day. When alcohol was banned on set, he found ways around the rules, soaking oranges with vodka and eating them to avoid detection. Malaria he had contracted in his youth returned with painful force, weakening his immune system. His heart, already strained, grew weaker with each passing year. By the time he appeared in The Sun Also Rises in 1957, his condition was so poor that producers no longer saw him as a romantic lead. Instead, he was cast as a broken alcoholic writer, a role that mirrored his real life in an uncomfortable and tragic way. While Flynn's health collapsed, his personal life grew more complicated and controversial. Financial problems added to the stress. Once one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors, Flynn had burned through his fortune. Poor investments, unpaid taxes, alimony payments to his ex-wife, and the failure of his self-funded film project, The Story of William Tell, left him nearly broke. His beloved Mulholland estate was gone, and maintaining his yacht, the Zacca, drained what little money remained. The pressure weighed heavily on Patrice, who managed the Jamaican property and tried to keep their life stable while shielding their daughter from the chaos. In 1957, Flynn's life took another disturbing turn, where he began a relationship with a 15-year-old dancer, Beverly Odland. The relationship shocked many and deeply hurt Patrice, marking a painful breaking point in their marriage. Beverly became Flynn's constant companion, traveling with him and even appearing in his final film, Cuban Rebel Girls. The movie was filmed during the Cuban Revolution, adding yet another layer of danger to Flynn's already reckless life. He became fascinated with Fidel Castro's movement and was president of Havana on the night dictator Fulgencio Batista fled the country. While Flynn chased excitement and purpose through political drama and youthful companionship, his body continued to fail him. In October 1959, Flynn's long struggle came to a sudden end. While in Vancouver, he visited a doctor complaining of severe back and leg pain. He was given an injection of Demerol, a powerful painkiller. Hours later, he collapsed from a massive heart attack. Errol Flynn was only 50 years old at the time of his death, but the autopsy revealed a body far older than his years. His liver was destroyed, his arteries clogged, and his organs ravaged by decades of excess. Doctors described his physical condition as closer to that of a man in his 70s. That Flynn's death sent shockwaves through Hollywood, but the world quickly moved on. Legends were easier to celebrate than broken men. For Patrice Wymore, however, the loss marked the beginning of a long and lonely chapter. At just 32 years old, she was suddenly a widow, left to raise a young daughter, while facing mounting debts and legal challenges. The glamorous life she once shared with Flynn disappeared almost overnight, replaced by responsibility and grief. She inherited the massive Jamaican estate, which appeared impressive but came with heavy financial burdens. Taxes, lawsuits, and maintenance costs turned the property into more of a challenge than a blessing. Despite everything, Patrice did not speak bitterly of Flynn. She understood his pain and the forces that had shaped him. While many in Hollywood distanced themselves from his memory, she quietly carried the truth of his life, protecting what she believed was worth preserving. This quiet strength would define the rest of her life and eventually lead her to confront the myths that had surrounded Errol Flynn for decades. Life after Errol Flynn's death forced Patrice Wymore to confront a reality far removed from the glamour that had once surrounded her. The Hollywood spotlight faded quickly, leaving her to manage responsibilities that few people ever saw or understood. At just 32 years old, Patrice found herself alone with a young daughter, Arnella, and a complicated inheritance that brought more stress than security. Flynn's Jamaican estate, though vast and beautiful, was difficult to maintain. Taxes, unpaid debts, and ongoing legal issues followed her everywhere. What appeared to outsiders as a life of comfort was, in truth, a daily struggle to keep things from collapsing entirely. Patrice made the difficult decision to step away from most acting opportunities so she could focus on stability and motherhood. In the early 1960s, Patrice did make a brief return to performing. She appeared in Ocean's 11 alongside Frank Sinatra and took part in stage musicals and summer theater productions. For a time, she even performed in Las Vegas, hoping to rebuild a sense of independence. However, the magic she once felt for show business was gone. Hollywood had changed, and so had she. The industry no longer held the promise it once did, and Patrice no longer wanted a life shaped by constant judgment and public scrutiny. By the late 1960s, she made the quiet but firm decision to leave acting behind for good. Patrice chose a simpler life in Jamaica, far from the gossip columns that had once followed her everywhere. She ran a small wicker furniture business and managed a cattle ranch left behind by Flynn. Though the work was demanding, it gave her a sense of control and peace she had never known in Hollywood. Friends describe her as private, thoughtful, and deeply loyal to the past, even when that past had caused her pain. She never remarried, choosing instead to dedicate herself entirely to raising Arnella and preserving a sense of normalcy in a life shaped by fame and loss. As Arnella grew older, Patrice worked hard to give her daughter the emotional support and stability that Errol Flynn himself had lacked as a child. Arnella was intelligent and strikingly beautiful, and as a young adult, she found success as a fashion model in Europe during the 1970s. Yet, despite Patrice's efforts, the shadows of her father's legacy followed Arnella closely. The world she entered was filled with parties, temptation, and excess, echoing the same environment that had once destroyed Errol. Patrice watched with quiet fear, aware that some struggles could not be controlled, no matter how much love a parent provided. Tragedy struck again in 1998 when Arnella died in Kingston, Jamaica, from a drug overdose at the age of 44. The loss was devastating for Patrice, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Arnella had been born on Christmas Day in 1953, a moment that once symbolized hope and renewal. Her death felt like a cruel reminder that pain can repeat itself across generations. For Patrice, it was a final and most painful chapter in a life already marked by grief. She retreated further into seclusion, avoiding public attention and focusing on surviving rather than rebuilding. Despite enduring immense loss, Patrice never allowed bitterness to define her. When Errol Flynn's name was attacked unfairly, she spoke out with quiet strength. In 1980, when author Charles Hyam published a biography accusing Flynn of being a Nazi sympathizer and spy, Patrice publicly challenged the claims. She insisted that Flynn had offered to assist British intelligence during World War II and that there was no evidence of collaboration with Nazi forces. Later, FBI files supported her position, confirming that while Flynn had been monitored, no proof of espionage existed. For Patrice, defending Flynn was not about denying his flaws, but about protecting the truth from distortion. As the years passed, Patrice lived quietly, carrying memories few could fully understand. She had known extraordinary fame, devastating loss, and the painful cost of loving a deeply troubled man. Her silence was not weakness, but endurance. And when she finally chose to speak again late in life, it was not for attention, but for clarity, honesty, and peace in her later years. Patrice Wymore became a quiet guardian of history, a woman who had spent more than half a century carrying the weight of Errol Flynn's name, without seeking sympathy or praise. Living in Jamaica, far from the noise of Hollywood, she chose a life of routine and reflection. Neighbors knew her as kind but reserved, someone who valued privacy and dignity above all else. She rarely spoke to the media, and when she did, her words were measured and thoughtful. Time had softened her anger, but sharpened her understanding. By the time she reached her 80s, Patrice had little left to lose, and perhaps for that reason, she finally felt free to speak with complete honesty at the age of 85. Patrice confirmed what many had long whispered but few had wanted to accept. She acknowledged that much of Errol Flynn's wild and reckless reputation had been deliberately shaped by the Hollywood studio system. Warner Brothers, she explained, had exaggerated his drinking, his womanizing, and even his political views to turn him into a larger-than-life figure. The studio did not simply sell movies. It sold myths. Flynn's private struggles were transformed into public entertainment, and his pain became part of his brand. According to Patrice, this image brought him fame, but it also trapped him. The more the world celebrated the reckless hero, the harder it became for Flynn to escape that role in real life. Patrice did not deny Flynn's flaws. She made it clear that he drank too much, made destructive choices, and hurt the people closest to him. However, she insisted that the public version of Errol Flynn was incomplete and often unfair. He was not the constant monster or careless villain he was sometimes portrayed to be. He was a deeply wounded man shaped by childhood neglect, overwhelming fame, and an industry that rewarded excess while ignoring consequences. Patrice believed that if Hollywood had shown him more care and less exploitation, his life might have followed a very different path. One of the most important confirmations Patrice made was regarding the long-standing accusation that Flynn had been a Nazi sympathizer or spy. These claims, she stated firmly, were not just wrong but harmful. Flynn had offered to help Allied intelligence during World War II and was considered for service, though ultimately rejected due to his poor health. FBI records later supported this account, showing that while Flynn had been monitored like many celebrities of the time, no evidence of espionage or treason was ever found. For Patrice, clearing Flynn's name on this issue was a matter of justice, not loyalty to IN speaking out. Patrice was not asking the world to forgive Errol Flynn, nor was she asking for his sainthood. Instead, she urged people to see him as a human being rather than a headline. Greatness and cruelty, she said, can exist in the same person. Talent does not erase harm, and suffering does not excuse bad behavior. But understanding the full truth matters. By reducing Flynn to a caricature of excess, the world had ignored the systems and pressures that helped destroy him. Patrice's confirmation forced a deeper reflection on Hollywood itself. Her words revealed an industry that created legends without caring about the long-term cost to the people behind them. Errol Flynn's life was not just a personal tragedy, but a warning about what happens when fame becomes a prison rather than a reward. Through her honesty, Patrice offered a more balanced legacy, one that did not deny the darkness, but also did not ignore the humanity beneath it. In the end, Patrice Wymore did not rewrite history. She completed it. At 85, she did not speak to shock or provoke, but to bring closure to a story that had been misunderstood for generations. Errol Flynn remains a legend, but thanks to Patrice, he can now be remembered not only as a symbol of adventure and scandal, but as a flawed man shaped by forces far larger than himself. The story of Errol Flynn, when viewed through the lens Patrice Wymore finally offered, becomes more than the rise and fall of a movie star. It becomes a reflection of an era when Hollywood created heroes without safeguards and destroyed them without apology. During the studio system's most powerful years, actors were treated as products rather than people. Their images were carefully constructed, controlled, and sold, while their private suffering was either ignored or quietly encouraged if it helped maintain public interest.